5 years. It's been 5 long years since the release of one of the greatest games of the last decade. Bloodborne's impact on the games industry cannot be understated, and of course, the game still holds up with its excellent gameplay. However, even after all this time, this game still has an incredibly passionate community. And I think one of the main catalysts of this community's passion is the effectiveness of the lore. Now, a few years ago, I made a video on why Bloodborne's horror is so effective, and one of the points I made in that video is the inspiration that classical gothic horror works, particularly H.P. Lovecraft's work, had on the series. The way the game uses these inspirations to forge its own lore is dynamic and engaging. One of the stories of Lovecraft's that I think relates to Bloodborne is found in the Dream Cycle collection of short stories, and it is titled The Hound. In this story, a young man's morbid curiosity drives him deeper and deeper into the depths of the eldritch truth, eventually leaving him to be pursued by a giant beast. Even with this ever-present danger, the man still delves into the treacherous world of the great old ones and ultimately loses his mind and his life. If you have played Bloodborne, this story may sound awfully familiar. The story of a major character. The story of Lawrence. It is truly bewildering to try and comprehend the ambition of some of Bloodborne's most influential characters. These characters, particularly Lawrence and Master Willem, discover that there are beings of vastly greater power than that of humanity hidden in the cosmos. And instead of going mad from this knowledge or bowing down in fear, they sought to gain that power. However, the two scholars differed on how to achieve that power. Willem sought this power through internal existential insight, while Lawrence sought this power through external physical growth, through the use of the Old Blood. The Old Blood was discovered deep within the Pthumerian catacombs, also known as the Tomb of the Great Ones. The Old Blood had miraculous healing and empowering effects of the like man had never seen before. However, Willem forbade the use of this blood, instructing his students to fear it, an adage which troubled Lawrence greatly. Nobody knows why Lawrence was so compelled by the Old Blood. Maybe it was the more swift and noticeable effects of the blood's use, or maybe Lawrence used it out of jealousy. After all, Willem was known around the world as a master scholar or a provost, and Lawrence was just a student of his. A brilliant student, but a student nonetheless. Lawrence could have possibly wanted this recognition for himself, and after the discovery of the effects of the Old Blood, found his way to achieve that recognition. Whatever his motivations, Lawrence used the Old Blood to create a schism in the scholars at Byrgenwerth. How this exactly unfolded we may never know, but what we do know is that everything sacred in Yharnam can be traced back to Byrgenwerth, and that this schism of the scholars led to the corruption of the city. The corruption that the Old Blood brings began long before the blood was introduced to the city of Yharnam. In fact, I believe that this corruption began in the halls of Byrgenwerth, right under Willem's nose. I believe that Lawrence and a small sect of other scholars began using the blood for its power, and the discovery of the fishing hamlet only furthered its use, leading to the schism of the scholars. It is not known when or how the fishing hamlet was discovered by the scholars of Byrgenwerth. What is known is that the residents of this hamlet were very much connected to the Great Ones, a connection that Lawrence desired deeply. So, under Lawrence's leadership, he and his sect, which included other known scholars such as Mikolash and Maria, traveled to the hamlet in order to gain this power. However, things did not go smoothly, and Lawrence, potentially inebriated by the Old Blood, demanded this power with or without the villagers' approval. Lawrence assigned the final member of his sect with achieving this goal, and that member was Gehrman. Gehrman did this task willingly, perhaps even enthusiastically, as he too wanted to ascend to a higher plane by any means necessary. With Maria by his side, Gehrman entered the fishing hamlet and began his first hunt. After making their way through the hamlet, Gehrman and Maria arrived at a beach, upon which the Great One Kos rested. All Great Ones are destined to have a child, and knowing this, Gehrman plunged his trick scythe into Kos's womb, extracting the fetus of an as-yet unnamed Great One. With this unborn Great One in his possession, Lawrence now had the means to achieve his goal of a higher plane. Little did he know that this higher plane would lead not to an epiphany, but a nightmare. Yharnam was but a small town when Lawrence and company arrived there. Old Yharnam, as it's now known, is where Lawrence began his ministry under the title of the Healing Church. I believe that, initially, the townsfolk of Yharnam were skeptical of Lawrence and his church, as they are not fond of outsiders. So if the citizens wouldn't accept him willingly, Lawrence would force them to. I believe that Lawrence ordered the river that ran underneath Old Yharnam to be poisoned, leading to the disease known as the Ashen Blood. While the medicine the Yharnamites already had access to, known as an antidote, was able to relieve the sickness, this relief was only temporary, and the disease would always return. It is at this point that Lawrence opened the doors of his church to all, freely transfusing the old blood to anyone who desired it. As the miraculous healing of the blood took effect, the disease of the Ashen Blood was eradicated, and Lawrence and his church were seen as saviors. Word quickly spread throughout the land of the Church of Yharnam that could cure all ailments, and rapidly the city of Yharnam grew, along with its commanding church. Alas, all was not perfect within this newfound prosperity, as it was discovered that some of the earliest patients treated with the old blood had begun to turn into hideous beasts. Realizing that if this side effect in partaking of the old blood became known to the populace, everything that he had built would crumble, Lawrence once again called upon Gehrman and Maria to dispatch the beasts. It is not known for how long this occurred, but each night, under the cover of darkness, Gehrman and Maria would enter into the streets and slay the beasts in secret. As the blood was given to more and more residents, more and more beasts began to emerge. Perhaps realizing what awaited the city, or maybe finally disgusted with the hunt, it is around this time that Maria abandoned Gehrman. With the threat of an ever-growing population of beasts looming, and his hunting partner leaving him, Gehrman created the Hunter's Workshop in order to train new hunters in the art of beast slaying. However, this was not a solution, rather a delaying of the inevitable. And on one night, as a red moon hung low in the sky, this inevitability erupted. As befitting of many downfalls, Lawrence's began in the same place as his rise, Old Yharnam. The place where Lawrence first proved the miracles of the old blood was now overrun with beasts, and there was little Gehrman and his hunters could do to stop it. After all, Gehrman trained his hunters to act like assassins, and this was an all-out war. Out of options, Lawrence threw secrecy out the window and called upon a sect of hunters known as the Powder Keg Hunters. This sect was separate from Gehrman's group, as they found no use for secrecy in their hunts. After all, their motto was, if a weapon ain't got kick, it's just not worth it. However, the Powder Kegs, with their explosive hammers and massive cannons, were still no match for the scores of beasts taking over Old Yharnam. Seeing no other choice, Lawrence ordered Old Yharnam to be sealed off and set ablaze. The Beast Scourge was now known to all in Yharnam, yet Lawrence still held command over the city. He inspired the citizens to rise up against the beasts and formed his own hunter's workshop under the church, whose command he left to the legendary tomb prospector, Ludwig. With no longer the need for secrecy, Lawrence ordered Gehrman to close his workshop and release his hunters from their everlasting dreams. Gehrman, now having lost both his love, Maria, and his purpose for hunting, decided to take his fate into his own hands. He took his third of Mother Cossa's umbilical cord, the other 2/3 of which were divided between Mikolash and Lawrence, and made an offer to a great one he discovered within his dreams, Flora. After abandoning her post as hunter, I believe Maria returned to the fishing hamlet. Disgusted with herself and her actions she took there, she discarded her beloved weapon, the Rakuyo, into the well at the center of the hamlet, as she could stomach it no longer. It is while she was here in the hamlet, I believe she discovered the curse that the villagers of the hamlet cast upon the hunters. Knowing her fate, I believe Maria returned to Yharnam and ascended to the top of the astral clock tower, where she took her own life, willingly entering into an endless nightmare. As the scourge of the beasts grew in Yharnam, Lawrence became more and more unhinged and began closing off sections of the city, allowing the madness to enrapture the citizens. Lawrence in this time partakes in more of the blood as panic builds within the city, inevitably leaving him to his fate. It is soon discovered that clerics turn into the most hideous beasts, as Lawrence transforms into the first cleric beast. Lawrence was aware that this fate was inevitable, and I believe that he ordered his underlings in the church to burn him after his transformation. Eventually, as the madness triggered by the old blood consumes Yharnam, there are no humans left, only flesh-hungry beasts. Upon his death, along with all of his blood-drunk brethren, Lawrence enters the Hunter's Nightmare, a reality where they reside in their madness for all of eternity. What makes this tale of Lawrence so brilliant is how the story combines two different types of corruption: the corruption of knowing things that were not meant to be known, and the corruption of power. Think back to the story of The Hound by Lovecraft. The narrator's morbid curiosity pushes him to put his life in jeopardy in order to find answers, even though the Hound pursues him throughout this endeavor. Like this narrator, Lawrence has the Beast Scourge revealed to him long before the outbreak at Old Yharnam, yet he continued to pursue his goal of evolution. The dangers of his work were shown to him and he ignored the warnings. This morbid curiosity and ignorance was combined with Lawrence's insatiable lust for power. This is why I believe that it was jealousy of Willem that drove Lawrence to pursue evolution through the Old Blood so thoroughly. After Lawrence proved that he could control the population, and once he gained that control, he refused to let it go, even as it quite literally made a beast out of the man he once was. Many other works of fiction have themes that center around the corruption that power brings, whether that be financial, political, or military. However, I don't believe that any work of fiction has such grand ambitions or consequences. Lawrence's lust for power is on a cosmic scale. He wants to gain control of not just countries or militaries, he wants to control entire realities, and he is willing to sacrifice all of humanity to achieve that goal. I think that one of the most compelling aspects of Bloodborne's lore and why people are still so interested in it is how the gameplay influences the lore. For example, if a player does not visit some of the optional areas on their playthrough, they will have a different understanding of the lore than a player who does. My favorite example of this is the unending war between the Vilebloods and the Executioners. While it's not too difficult to find Alfred the Vileblood Hunter in the first playthrough, proceeding with his questline requires that the player find him multiple times in multiple different areas and giving him an item from a seemingly unrelated area. This ignites a story arc in which Alfred, who at first seems to be one of the friendliest people in the entire city, becomes completely unhinged and brutally murders the Vileblood Queen of Cainhurst, ending the war between the Executioners and Vilebloods, in his mind. And this whole side story is entirely missable. The vagueness of the lore allows each player to interpret the story in their own way and determine right and wrong in each scenario. This player agency is a driving force in the brilliance of Bloodborne's lore, because the player has an effect on the lore. For example, in my first playthrough, I got freaked out by the chapel dweller and immediately killed him. So after I talked to Yosefka's imposter at the clinic, I started sending the scared townsfolk there thinking it was safe. I was shocked when I finally opened the back of the clinic and realized that all the citizens I sent there were turned into celestial beings. So, on my next playthrough, I brought everyone back to Odin Chapel, and many different stories and lore snippets revealed themselves. If you've played Bloodborne, let me know in the comments what your favorite stories from your playthroughs are. We've all had unique experiences, and I want to know yours. One of these lore snippets is a part of the previously mentioned war between the Executioners and the Vilebloods. After Alfred murders the Vileblood Queen and commits suicide hoping to become a martyr, the player can take the fleshy remains of the Queen to a secret altar and resurrect her, ending the war in victory for the Vilebloods. This player agency is brought to a head in the multiple endings of Bloodborne. The player's exploration of the game world, the decisions they made, and their knowledge of the lore can influence the ending they decide. Whether they decide to release themselves from the dream and forget the hunt altogether, to fight Gehrman and embrace the moon presence to become the host of the dream, or challenging the moon presence and ascending to become a great one yourself, the player's choice has a profound and deep effect on the lore. Bloodborne's most important character is you. No, not the character that you play as in the game. You. You, the human being watching this video and playing this game. That's why Bloodborne's lore is so effective. It tells a rich, dark, and engrossing story in which the player's input, agency, and conscience are put at the forefront of that storytelling experience.